Let's see. So, hello. Welcome to week 5 of Biblical Interpretations. For those watching in person in Lakeville, I hope you've noticed that I am not there, and that is why you see me on the screen. If you haven't noticed I am not there, then there's probably a doctor's office close by, and maybe we should get you there. Um, so this week and next week, I'm with my family currently in Chicago. So because of this, I'm actually just going to be elongating some of the topics that we have discussed so far. So we're not going to be moving super aggressively forward this week and next week. I really want to be sure that the foundation that we're kind of building and establishing is really well, hopefully understood before we really push forward. So I'm expecting once I am back, we'll start to shift our focus more towards biblical maps and getting into kind of the geological and political circumstances that surround the lands of the biblical text. And so on that note, we will be getting some really incredible, really high quality geographical maps of the biblical settings. I do expect these maps to be free for those that want them. However, they do cost $26 per set. So if anyone wants to donate, either for their own set or for others to have a set as well, that would be extremely helpful. The maps are a lot of fun.
And just a quick question.
Yes.
Question is, for someone who says, wow, why would I use these 7 maps? They're going to get their own personal maps and not just for the class. They get their own personal map and then they can write on it or use it.
Correct.
In what way?
Yeah.
Right.
So the reason why you want a set of maps is because how do I say this? And this is what I went through as well with my degree. It's probably most helpful for each person to draw on maps the different the different information that we'll discuss. And the reason why is because it'll really help you have a better understanding on how the geography matters. Some of these things are things that I think the more internalized you can get with the information pertaining to the maps, the more helpful it is for yourself. So if I just present the information, it may not connect quite in the same way as if you yourself are writing the information on the maps as we go through it. So I want everybody to have a set of maps, and we'll have markers and highlighters and things like that too to be going through these things. But it's just really cool. I think I love the exercises, and that was actually the last point I was going to make. One of the things with the maps that's super helpful is it's still extremely pertinent information to today. I'm not going to get into on here regarding Israel-Palestine conflict right now, but I will say that the ancient maps still absolutely apply today. Why the Middle East is the way it is, I think has everything to do with geography. So being able to go through that yourself is really helpful. So anyways, yeah, everybody will get a set of maps. They're really cool. They're super high quality, and hopefully that'll be fun. So yeah, if you'd like to donate, you can talk to Pastor Paul or myself when I'm back in a few weeks. But we'll have like 15 sets of maps, so hopefully we'll have enough for anybody that wants them. So for now, let's recap. So My name is James Kaufman. I'm a husband and a father. I own an automotive business. Um, and yeah, I have a degree in biblical and theological studies in ancient Near Eastern history. Although I'm not an expert in anything. um, in week 1, we discussed some rules for the class. Fundamentally, if you don't like something I say, I ask for grace, forgiveness, and an understanding that nothing about the topics we discuss are easy. I'm not perfect. I don't expect you to be me, and I have no expectations of you. So far, we have discussed 2 foundational assumptions I make in this class. Week 1, we discussed hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the theory and methodology of interpretation. Weeks 2 and 3, we discussed the second foundational assumption I make, that being a specific epistemological paradigm. That being the idea that at all moments in the present, the totality of human knowledge is fully known. I use epistemology in a specific way based on my perception of how knowledge works, and I believe that framework in and of itself is the very thing the biblical text is concerned with. In other words, a fundamental hermeneutic I hold is that the biblical text is deeply concerned with specific epistemological matters. Last week, in week 4, we then applied these 2 assumptions and applied it to what I believe is a starting point in trying to answer the question, what is the Bible? And so we quickly went down a path of logic based on some questions that, depending on how you answer them, will affect the hermeneutic you take to the biblical text. The specific thing I want you to think about when we go down this path of logic is this. Can you think of ideas or frameworks that fall outside of the spectrums laid out? And so this is fundamentally what we are going to talk about tonight. And I don't know how long this will take. I literally just finished writing this like maybe 10 minutes ago. So it might feel like a short class. So yeah, so here we go. Does God exist? The first obvious pertinent question is this. If you believe or answer the question is no, God does not exist, then that is called atheism. If you say, I don't know if God exists, then that is called agnosticism. It means you place the potential knowledge of God as always being beyond what is currently possible for humanity to know. But maybe it's in the realm of knowledge that is potential knowledge in the future. If you say God exists, but is beyond all knowledge, and that God doesn't make itself known to humanity, then that is called deism. And if you believe God exists and the knowledge of God is possible to know, then we call that theism. Can anyone think of a fifth idea? Is there some other defining concept or belief structure regarding a claim about the existence of God that doesn't fall within one of these 4 options? As far as I can tell, I cannot think of a fifth category. Now, you might suggest Gnosticism, but Gnosticism is actually on this chart. I just don't have a great way to depict it. Basically, Gnosticism and agnosticism are polar opposites, and it basically has to do with the confidence of the belief. Agnostics say, I might be wrong, whereas Gnostics say, I know I am right. So it is possible to be an agnostic atheist or a Gnostic atheist. Or it's possible to be an agnostic theist or a Gnostic theist, for example. As I have the chart laid out, I basically am using Gnostic atheism as the starting point and agnostic theism as the counterpoint, if that makes sense. The point being that spectrum of options is on here. But I wonder if every claim pertaining to the existence of God can only fit within one of these four classifications. Now, this matter is a different topic, but it might come up later in the class. But it's very interesting to think about. Why are there only so many options? But let's table that idea for now. Now, from here, we have four paths we could take. We could spend the rest of this class discussing atheism, or theism, or agnosticism, or deism. Or try to expand the knowledge of humanity and try to come up with a fifth or sixth option that no one has ever thought of before. Maybe we could do a PhD on that. But going back, sorry, I've got my dog here. But going back to the essential identity of this class, this isn't a class about the existence of God. This is a class about the Bible. So if we want to pick one of these paths to explore, the next question we would ask is not, is atheism / theism / agnosticism / deism the most logical or philosophically correct? Because answering that question doesn't pertain to a class about the biblical text. So how would we ask the question as it pertains to this class? I think we would ask it like this. What does a biblical hermeneutic look like if you assume atheism, or theism, or agnosticism, or deism? See, I think it is valid to read the text with these thoughts in mind. Have fun. Go explore the realm of possible knowledge. Have at it. However, I think the order in which you consider these options matters. What do I mean by this? I mean, if you assume Gnostic atheism, that being a negative viewpoint or a very low assumption of the existence of God, and you take that assumption to the biblical text, often what we find are very negative and very diminishing, very low meaning interpretations of the text. For example, an atheist might say of the text, why does the Bible even matter? It was just written by a bunch of dead people who were trying to manipulate people. Or the Bible is evil and bad for humanity because being God doesn't exist. The fact of the text doesn't just straight up, using plain language, make statements regarding morality that align with what I myself believe about morality, contextualized by the non-existence of God, because the only way the book could have meaning is if it did so. So therefore, religious zealots today couldn't use this text to manipulate society. But being it doesn't do that, therefore it is evil and should be eradicated from society. I would say that is a very poor hermeneutic of the text because it already assumes there isn't meaningful meaning to be found. And of course, if that is the assumption going in, then that is the interpretive meaning you'll find coming out. A better approach, in my opinion, would be to try to understand the hermeneutical options from the viewpoint of the author and its audience, and what they believed about the existence of God, and interpret it from that point of view, and upon doing so, then refilter it to the framework you hold yourself today in such matters. And I would bet my life you'll find real, impactful, meaningful meaning to walk away with that might just help you in life. In other words, if you are an atheist, maybe try assuming a theistic hermeneutic first to try to see if you can conclude a meaningful viewpoint from that perspective. Then see how it fits with your own beliefs regarding the non-existence of God. This is a much fairer approach to take and is much more in line with how people interpret any general text today. And so this brings me to one of my main hermeneutic assumptions that I believe in. I think interpretive meaning can be argued from a lot of perspectives and methods, but I won't take any method as reasonable that doesn't start with an attempt at trying to understand the author's intent and the audience's interpretation. And so we don't need to spend time on atheistic, agnostic, or deistic viewpoints in interpretive meaning for the purposes of this class. I personally actually find a lot of those viewpoints to also have the potential for a lot of extremely meaningful meaning. But that isn't what we are after right now. In short, what we are after is trying to answer the question, what is the Bible? But really, that is the wrong question as well. I've actually been lying to you this whole time. We aren't trying to answer this question either. The question we're actually trying to answer is, what does the Bible say what the Bible is? This is fundamentally what we are after. And maybe it isn't possible to answer, or maybe it isn't possible to know. But I think it is worth exploring. And I also think what answers we can find in the text to answer the question is the first starting point in interpreting reasonable, meaningful meaning. Even if the answers I can come up with are ultimately objectively incorrect, I believe it is worth trying. Again, I acknowledge I am not the expert, so this is all just my perspective. And my professors certainly had a lot to say about it when I was in school. And so, I don't think I need to spend time establishing why, for our purposes in this class, we will assume a theistic perspective as our hermeneutic starting point. In other words, let's assume the biblical authors assumed God exists and use that assumption moving forward. So if we assume God exists, we can remove atheism and agnosticism from our framework for now. So then the next step on our path of logical inquiry is, if God exists, who or what is God? And from this viewpoint, we face hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions, or an infinite number of options and paths forward. So how do we make sense of all these options before us? Well, humanity starts to classify and categorize. And I believe what we find is, again, of the potential infinite claims that could be made about who or what God is, I think all of the possible options can fit within the same options of categorizations established before. God doesn't exist. God is within knowledge. God is outside of knowledge. And so again, for our purposes, the question is, does the Bible describe a God that is unknowable or knowable? If you answer, I don't know, then you have three options. End the inquiry there, assume God is unknowable, or assume God is knowable. If you end the inquiry, then the logic path ends. And maybe this is ultimately correct, but does it make sense to arrive at that conclusion before exploring the next logical steps forward? Or does it make sense to conclude that once you've explored the next logical paths forward? I personally see no option but to move onwards. Is the Bible describing a God that can't be known? If the answer is yes, then you have a very interesting journey forward. as far as a hermeneutic approach to take with the text. And again, maybe this is the correct take. I personally don't fully know how to interpret the text from the perspective that the text isn't trying to describe a God that wants to be known. So this would be a very hard path for me personally to take. You would basically have to interpret the text where every time the text is describing something about God, it means something else. Maybe the use of the word God in the biblical text is completely allegorical, and it's our job to find a replacement for understanding. I don't know. To me, that seems unreasonably convoluted, but maybe it's valid. But again, does it make sense to begin an interpretive journey with that being the first assumption? Or does it make more sense to conclude this after the fact? So for me, I'm yet again left with no option but to move forward. I think it is reasonable to assume as a hermeneutic tool that the text is trying to describe a God that can be known. So even if any of the other options before this are true or more reasonable to conclude, I think it is only the case after having continued the path forward and seeing how far it goes. Only then does it possibly make sense to revert back. And so this is why we are assuming a theistic perspective on our attempt of interpreting meaningful meaning from the text. So it was from this position last week we arrived at this point. If God exists, is the essential identity of that God defined and contained within reality and or the totality of known or possible to know human knowledge? Or is that God's essential identity defined and contained entirely beyond anything within reality and known or possible to know human knowledge? Is God within reality or beyond? Does the Bible describe a God that is defined within reality or outside of reality? This is the fundamental question. We summarized these two positions as continuous and transcendence. Continuous meaning the essential identity and definition of God is entirely within reality. Transcendence meaning the essential identity and defining characteristics of God is beyond everything. Last week after class, someone asked me a very, very excellent question. Doesn't the framework of transcendence contradict the framework of deism that I used? I'd like to address that and clarify. In short, the answer is kind of. I wouldn't say it's a contradiction. Rather, I would say both deism and theism share a similar issue that atheism and agnosticism don't have to deal with. That being, where within the knowledge of God is God? I said preemptively last week that the definition of deism I was using was a loose definition, and the reason being that deism also falls on a spectrum of options of beliefs. The spectrums of answering the question within theism and deism can potentially overlap and blur, depending on who you speak to. In fact, there is a deism Facebook group I follow, and this exact issue is basically what the group is constantly arguing about. In short, it's a semantics issue. Here is the very first picture and discussion in this group. And oh, that's so ironic. It's a graphic depicting a spectrum of options of beliefs. Interesting. I wonder why. So in the framework I'm using, I am in essence claiming that at this point, deism becomes some form of theism. That is it. I don't see it as contradictory. However, the idea of deism yet again creates a semantics issue that only theism has to address. And that being, how can you know God? And so we come back to this, and we can start to do the thing that humans do and start defining and categorizing based on arbitrary sets of data. If we add deism back into the discussion at this point, we have 4 possible options. And you'll see why I ended deism's path back at point 2. You also might better understand why we left atheism and agnosticism behind as well. Transcendent theism, transcendent deism, continuous theism, and continuous deism. So let's explore these options a bit. Let's ponder continuous theism or continuous theism. We tapped into this a little bit last week. What is this? What do claims about the essential identity of God that fit this criteria look like? So we get a God that I claim to know for certainty exists. And it's defined within all of reality and knowledge. So I could claim that I know for certain this specific piece of bread that I got from my kitchen is God. Or I could claim that I know for certain this specific random leaf I found outside is God. Or I could claim to know for certain that the sun is God. If I claim this specific leaf is God, what rational reason do I have to assume that? How can I know that? And this brings us to a very important point of rationalization. From what I can tell, all claims regarding the existence of continuous theistic gods tend to evolve over time into a higher and higher, more powerful concepts of beings that fundamentally can have some form of control over life and death and humanity. You've never heard of this religion I just created that worships this piece of bread because I just ate it. And in doing so, I established dominion and control over this piece of bread. So now it no longer exists. However, I don't have dominion or control over the sun. So from a mythological mindset, it is potentially rational to assume the sun is God. But a specific piece of bread or a leaf is not God. It's all about dominion. Rob Bell has a really good framework on this concept called The Gods Aren't Angry. I recommend watching that someday. So now let's ponder continuous deism. I think you'll see why we left this behind a while ago. I actually think it's hilarious to think about. What would a claim about the essential identity of an unknown God look like? I think it would be as follows. There might be a piece of bread that is God, but I can't possibly know which piece of bread is God because it doesn't make itself known as God. Or cats are God, but they don't want humans to know they're God. Or one specific cat in the entire world is God, but not all cats are God. And we can't possibly know which one is and which one isn't. Or we can't know if the sun is God because it doesn't make itself known to be God. So we don't really need to spend time exploring continuous deism. It's like trying to engage with providing a negative or proving a negative. Even if it's true, we can't know. That's the point. So I hope you see why it also doesn't take much sense to explore agnosticism or atheism from this point of view. What does continuous agnosticism look like? It's the statement, I don't know if cats are God. Okay. Or what does continuous atheism look like? The sun is not God. Okay. Cool story, bro. So now we can move on to transcendent deism. What would a claim about the essential identity of a God that is beyond reality and all knowledge, that doesn't want humanity to know its existence, what would that claim look like? If there is a God that does exist, and it is beyond all reality and knowledge, and it doesn't want the knowledge of it to be known to humanity, then we can't know of its existence. Or whatever that God is revealing isn't anything we can comprehend, and thus that God is not transcendent. That God doesn't blur the line between the epistemological boundary of what can or can't be known about that God. This borders on the traditional definition of deism. So this is why we left it behind. We don't need to discuss transcendent deism. It's what it is. And so we end up back here. So transcendent theism is a God that is entirely defined as beyond reality and human knowledge. And yet that God reveals itself to be known. That is what makes it unique. And that's what makes it its own entire category. And so this brought us to this key theological concept that if you are a theist and you believe God's essential identity is outside of reality and human knowledge, then you must believe in the idea of revelation. That being somehow this God reveals who it is to humanity, transcending the boundary between what is unknown, possibly known, and known. And I, along with a lot of theologians and scholars, believe this is the essential identity of what the biblical text is claiming to do. So from here, we could go a lot of different directions. We could spend time discussing why God could be transcendent or continuous. Or we could discuss if God doesn't exist, whether the Bible is describing a God that is no different than any other mythology, or if the framework expressed in the text is entirely unique. So this is why we started with the creation account in Genesis 1. All attempts of a description of a continuous God ultimately seek a higher and higher power, something that has dominion and control. And so with a transcendent God, it only makes sense that God would be revealed to be the creator. Why would the text begin to reveal anything else if not that? We as humanity genuinely can't think of or comprehend a concept that is higher or more powerful or something that has more dominion over life more than the concept of a creator. And it doesn't matter how fictional we go in our imagination. Watch the entirety of the Marvel series or the Transformer movies or so many other superhero or mythological or fantasy genres within human creation. Every story seems to ultimately be about some source of creation and some attempt at the undoing of it. The paradigm remains true even in our wildest imaginations. In the words of Spinal Tap, there is no 11. And it isn't the Bible either. Or isn't and it isn't in the Bible either. As far as I can tell, the only component of the biblical text that attempts to cross that line is the revelation of the name of God itself. And so for me, this is the thought process. Beyond this point in our journey, is there another logical extension or claim to be made? Is there a logical, theoretical, theistic claim of God that we can add to the continuous versus transcendent framework? I can't think of one, and this is the point. It is at this point we take the next step on to step 4 down our path of logic. So what is step 4? Step 4 is, how do you know what God reveals? How do you know revelation from God? How can you distinguish revelation from reality? So to me, the Bible doesn't concern itself much with steps 1 and 2 of this journey. Rather, it spends almost all of its time on steps 3 and 4. It seems to be deeply concerned with the distinction and separation of the God of the biblical text from all other conceivable gods. And it is deeply concerned with how the revelation and knowledge of God happens. And to me, this is what makes the biblical text so incredible, that it seems to have the foresight to have addressed these very issues. And so tonight, I don't have much more to add. I wanted to ensure getting to this point in our journey was well established. I realize there are a million things I either missed or entirely jumped over, but I could swim in circles in my brain trying to qualify and qualify and qualify every possible statement that could possibly be made to the point of going crazy. And I just can't do that. But I hope the concept of special revelation has been made clear and why it is an essential identifying theological characteristic of monotheistic religions and the claims and beliefs often held. So next week, I will be in Chicago again, and class will entirely be online. I expect to go into the text and see how it qualifies God as not being continuous, but rather transcendent. From there, we will either continue our discussion on how the text addresses revelation. That might be my favorite topic to study of everything that could be studied in the biblical text, actually. Or we will put all that on pause and start getting into some of the maps, because that's also something that needs to be done. So thanks for coming tonight. It might be possible to try for some questions. So I just have to unmute anyone. So if you have a question, turn your camera on and raise your hand, and I can unmute as needed. So thank you, everybody, for listening tonight. So any questions? Let's see. No? Maybe? See if I can find everybody. Okay. I don't think so. So thank you, everybody. So goodbye.